με φαινόμενα οπτικά. Ειδικά η επίδειξη θα αποτελείται από προβολή ολογραφικών εικόνων σε πολλά μέρη του κόσμου και ο καθένας θα λαμβάνει την εικόνα που θα αντιστοιχεί στην εθνική του θρησκεία. Τότε θα προβάλλεται ο Ιησούς, ο Μωάμεθ, ο Κρίσνα και οι υπόλοιποι και θα συγχωνευτούν σε μία μορφή, αφού εμείς έχουμε εξηγήσει το μυστήριο των θρησκευτικών αποκαλύψεων. Στην πραγματικότητα η μοναδική θεότητα θα είναι ο Αντίχριστος, που θα εξηγήσει ότι τα διάφορα ιερά βιβλία έχουν παρερμηνευτεί και δεν έχουν εξηγηθεί σωστά και οι παλαιές θρησκείες είναι υπεύθυνες που ο άνθρωπος είναι εναντίον του ανθρώπου. Δεύτερο μέρος. Γι' αυτό το λόγο όλες οι θρησκείες θα καταργηθούν για να ανοίξει ο δρόμος για τη θρησκεία της νέας εποχής και της νέας παγκόσμιας τάξης, αντιπροσωπεύοντας τον μοναδικό Θεό, τον Αντίχριστο, που θα εμφανιστεί στον ουρανό μπροστά σε όλα τα μάτια για να τον θαυμάσουν. Αυτή η μεγάλη μοίηση θα έχει ως αποτέλεσμα να δημιουργηθεί κοινωνική, πολιτική, πολιτιστική και θρησκευτική αναταραχή. Τρίτη φάση. Η τρίτη φάση του σχεδίου Blue Beam είναι η τηλεπάθεια με ηλεκτρονικά συστήματα εκπεμπόμενα στον αέρα με ηλεκτρομαγνητικές χαμηλές συχνότητες, πολύ χαμηλές συχνότητες που θα φτάνουν στο κάθε άτομο μέσα στη συνείδησή του. Τέτοια ακτινοβολία εκπεμπόμενη από δορυφόρους μπορεί να σχηματίσει και να διαχύσει μέσα στη σκέψη τεχνητή σκέψη. Πειράματα εν σχέση με αυτό το πρόγραμμα έχουν αναφερθεί ότι έλαβαν χώρα σε διάφορες χώρες κάτω από ειδικές περιστάσεις. Ένα γιγάντωμα της χαμηλής συχνότητας μπορεί να παράγει ακουστικά μηνύματα μέσα στο μυαλό κάθε ατόμου, ενώ οι υπόλοιποι δεν θα ακούν τίποτα. Τέταρτη φάση. Το τέταρτο συστατικό του σχεδίου περιλαμβάνει υπερφυσικά γεγονότα διαμέσου ηλεκτρονικών συσκευών. Αυτή η φάση αποτελείται από τρία διαφορετικά σημεία. Το πρώτο θα κάνει τους ανθρώπους να πιστεύσουν ότι μία εξωγήινη εισβολή θα λάβει χώρα σε κάθε πόλη του κόσμου. Η δεύτερη απάτη είναι να πιστέψουν οι χριστιανοί ότι αυτό το θαυμάσιο γεγονός θα συμβεί με σχήμα εξωγήινο που θα είναι ευεργετικό για την ανθρωπότητα. Ο σκοπός αυτής της μανούβρας είναι να συγκεντρώσει σε μία μεγάλη συγκέντρωση όλους τους αντίθετους στη νέα παγκόσμια τάξη μπροστά σε αυτό το παγκόσμιο γεγονός. Το τρίτο σημείο αυτής της φάσης είναι η ολοκληρωμένη χρήση όλων των μοντέρνων εργαλείων της επικοινωνίας να διαχύσει κύματα ώστε να αποσταθεροποιήσει φυσικώς τους ανθρώπους στο επίπεδο της ατομικής και συλλογικής παραισθήσεως. Με όλα αυτά τα τηλεπαθητικά ηλεκτρονική βοηθούμενη επικοινωνία, αμφίδρομη με ακτίνα, επανάσταση στους ήχους, μία ακτίνα ήχου που λειτουργεί σαν φως, δουλεύει μόνο στους ανθρώπους που θέλουν να το ακούσουν. Αυτό θα είναι το τέλος της ηχορύπανσης, όπου τα ILF, VLF και ELF είναι χαμηλής συχνότητας ηλεκτρομαγνητικά κύματα, θα φτάνουν σε κάθε πρόσωπο μέσα στο μυαλό και το μυαλό της, πείθοντας κάθε έναν από αυτούς ότι ο δικός τους Θεός μιλάει σε αυτούς από τα πολύ βαθιά μέρη της καρδιάς τους. Οι ακτίνες τότε θα διαπλέκονται με τη φυσική σκέψη για να σχηματίσουν αυτό που λέμε τεχνητή σκέψη. Τέταρτο βήμα έχει να κάνει με τις παγκόσμιες υπερφυσικές εκδηλώσεις με ηλεκτρονικά μέσα. Το ένα είναι να κάνει τον άνθρωπο να πιστέψει ότι μια εξωγήινη επίθεση είναι περίπου να συμβεί σε κάθε πόλη της γης, για να προκαλέσει κάθε μεγάλο ένθρος να χρησιμοποιήσει τα πυρηνικά όπλα και να χτυπήσει πίσω αυτούς τους ψευδοεξωγήινους. Κατά αυτόν τον τρόπο τα Ηνωμένα Έθνη θα απαιτήσουν από εκείνα τα έθνη που εκτόπισαν τα πυρηνικά όπλα να αφοπλιστούν. Η εισβολή θα αποδειχθεί ότι ήταν ψεύτικη. Το δεύτερο είναι μια ψευδής αρπαγή που θα κάνει τους χριστιανούς να πιστέψουν ότι η αρπαγή πρόκειται να συμβεί με την υποτιθέμενη θεϊκή παρέμβαση ενός ψευδοεξωγήινου πολιτισμού. Έρχεται να διασώσει τους γήινους από τους άγριους άσπλαχνους δαίμονες. Ο στόχος θα είναι να απορρίψουν όλη την σημαντική αντίσταση εναντίον της νέας τάξης πραγμάτων με ένα σφοδρό κτύπημα. Ο τρίτος προσανατολισμός του τέταρτου βήματος είναι ανάμειξη ηλεκτρονικών υπερφυσικών δυνάμεων. Τα κύματα που χρησιμοποιούν αυτή την ώρα θα επιτρέψουν στις υπερφυσικές δυνάμεις να ταξιδέψουν διαμέσω οπτικών ινών και καλωδίων TV ηλεκτρονικής γραμμής για να διεισδύσουν στον κάθε ένα προσωπικά ταυτόχρονα διαμέσου μεγάλων συσκευών. Ενσωματωμένα chips είναι στη θέση τους. Ο στόχος αυτών των πράξεων με τα παγκόσμια σατανικά φαντάσματα που θα προβάλλονται σε όλο τον κόσμο για να σπρώξουν όλους τους πληθυσμούς στο χείλος της ιστερίας, της τρέλας, να τους πνίξουν σε ένα κύμα αυτοκτονιών, δολοφονιών και σε διαρκείς ψυχολογικές ανομαλίες. Μετά τη νύχτα των 1000 αστεριών, οι παγκόσμιοι πληθυσμοί θα είναι έτοιμοι να δεχθούν τον νέο Μεσσία για να επανιδρύσουν νέα τάξη και ασφάλεια με καθεστώς ακόμα και με το κόστος από την προσωπική τους ελευθερία. Βγάλτε τα δικά σας συμπεράσματα. Ψάξτε την αλήθεια πάντοτε. Ο έλεγχος της γης θα ευρίσκεται στα χέρια τεχνοκρατών και αρχιερέων και οι τεχνοκράτες θα είναι αδυσόπιτοι στο όνομα του Θεού. Ο σκοπός αυτής της δικτακτορίας θα είναι ο έλεγχος όλων των ανθρώπων και όλων των πλουτοπαραγωγικών πηγών της γης. Πολλοί άνθρωποι ρωτούν πότε θα συμβούν όλα αυτά, πώς τα οράματα της νύχτας των 1000 αστεριών θα εκτελεστούν και ποια θα είναι τα προειδοποιητικά στοιχεία για αυτά τα γεγονότα. Σύμφωνα με τις αναφορές που έχουμε λάβει, πιστεύουμε ότι αυτό θα ξεκινήσει με ένα είδος παγκόσμιας οικονομικής καταστροφής. Για να εμποδίσουν κάποια επιθυμία για ανεξαρτησία, η νέα παγκόσμια τάξη έχει εμφυτέψει μικροτσίπ σε άγρια πουλιά και ζώα και ψάρια. Για ποιο λόγο? Θέλουν να είναι βέβαιοι ότι αυτοί που αντιστέκονται στη νέα παγκόσμια τάξη να μην μπορούν να κυνηγήσουν, να ψαρέψουν πουθενά στον κόσμο. Εάν προσπαθήσουν θα εντοπιστούν γρήγορα από τους δορυφόρους, θα κυνηγηθούν, θα φυλακιστούν ή θα σκοτωθούν. Εκείνοι που φαίνεται ότι είναι όχι αξιόπιστοι και μη κανονικοί θα σταλούν στα στρατόπεδα συγκέντρωσης, όπου τα σώματά τους θα απολυθούν σε αυτόν που θα κάνει το μεγαλύτερο πληστηριασμό. Εκείνοι που θα εξολοθρευτούν, που δεν θα εξολοθρευτούν, θα χρησιμοποιηθούν σαν σκλάβοι και εργάτες, θα χρησιμοποιηθούν για πειράματα ιατρικά. Ο σκοπός της δικτακτορίας είναι ο έλεγχος του πλανήτη, αδιάκοπα και χωρίς εξαίρεση. Γι' αυτό το λόγο η νέα τεχνολογία που εφαρμόζεται παντού είναι τεχνολογία για να ελέγχει τους ανθρώπους σε όλα τα μέρη και όλα τα πλάτη της γης σε όλες τις ώρες. Είναι εύκολο να ελέγξεις αν υπάρχει διείσδυση αυτών των τεχνικών σε όλες τις μορφές ελέγχου της ζωής. Διοικητικές, οικονομικές, κοινωνικές, ιατρικές, ψυχιατρικές, τεχνολογία αστυνομικών πληροφοριών, τραπεζικών πληροφοριών. Κανένα τμήμα είναι που δεν θα μείνει που να μην επηρεαστεί.
Ισχυρίζονται ότι αυτός θα είναι ο παράδεισος, όπου όλοι έχουν μια προαποφασισμένη λειτουργία, είτε τους αρέσει είτε όχι. Αυτό θα είναι το στρατόπεδο συγκεντρώσεως για αυτούς που δεν θα δεχθούν το νέο σύστημα. Για αυτούς που δεν θα δεχθούν τη νέα παγκόσμια τάξη θα προσδοκώνται στρατόπεδα συγκεντρώσεως και αποκαταστάσεως, όπου οι τρόφιμοι θα κατατάσσονται σύμφωνα με την καινούργια ταυτότητα πάνω στη βάση του χρώματος του ουρανίου τόξου. Η δεύτερη κατηγορία φυλακισμένων θα χρησιμοποιούνται για επιστημονικά και ιατρικά πειράματα. Η τρίτη κατηγορία των φυλακισμένων που έχουν καλή υγεία θα γίνουν δούλοι στην Τράπεζα Παγκοσμίων Σωμάτων. Τα σώματά τους θα απομακρύνονται το ένα μετά το άλλο, ενώ θα είναι ζωντανή υπό μηχανική υποστήριξη. Η τέταρτη κατηγορία θα είναι των φυλακισμένων που δουλεύουν κάτω από τη γη. Η τέταρτη κατηγορία είναι των φυλακισμένων που δουλεύουν κάτω από τη γη. Η νέα παγκόσμια τάξη βασίζεται σε μια δικτακτορία. Το όνομά της συγκεντρώνει όλα τα καλά που συμβολίζονται από τον Μεσσία, δηλαδή τον Αντίχριστο. Αυτό θα είναι αδιέξοδο και τυραννία που θα δίνει την εμφάνιση δημοκρατίας. Τα στρατόπεδα συγκεντρώσεως και οι σκλάβοι θα είναι κρυμμένοι από το κοινό. Η πέμπτη κατηγορία είναι των πολιτών που δεν θα είναι έμπιστοι ότι θα ξαναποκατασταθούν με μετάνοια μπροστά στην τηλεόραση για να αποδεχθούν τη νέα παγκόσμια τάξη. Η έκτη κατηγορία είναι εκείνοι που είναι φυγάδες. Περιμένουμε ακόμα πληροφορίες για την 7η κατηγορία των φυλακισμένων. Αυτό είναι το υποτιθέμενο σχέδιο του ουρανού για τη γη. Όταν πήρα την απόφαση να αποκαλύψω τις πληροφορίες για το μυστικό σχέδιο, το σχέδιο Μπλε Ακτίνα, δεν ήμουν σίγουρος ότι θα επεζούσα. Αλλά σύμφωνα με τη χριστιανική μου συνείδηση, τη βαθιά αγάπη για όλους τους ξένους αδερφούς και αδερφές μου, συμφώνησα να δώσω τη ζωή μου για την αλήθεια και αποκαλύπτοντάς αυτήν και τις 4 φάσεις του παγκοσμίου διαβολικού σχεδίου Μπλε Ακτίνα. Αυτό που μπορώ να πω σε όλους εσάς είναι που έχετε διαβάσει την εξήγησή μου για αυτό το διαβολικό σχέδιο, είναι να μην παραλύσετε από το φόβο σας, αλλά να διαδώσετε αυτή την πληροφορία. Προσευχόμαστε να αντιστεκόμεθα με τον καλύτερο τρόπο και να προετοιμαζόμαστε να αντιμετωπίσουμε την αρπαγή της εξουσίας της νέας παγκόσμιας τάξης. Πρέπει να καταλάβουμε ότι η παγκόσμια τάξη δεν είναι μόνιμη ή αιώνια. Αλλά αυτό που προέχει τώρα είναι να οργανωθούμε με σκοπό να επιβιώσουμε. Σέρς Μονάστ, διεθνής έρευνα δημοσιογράφων, πέθανε κάτω από περίεργες συνθήκες. Το φυλάδιο γράφει Σέρς Μονάστ, CIA, εμβόλια, φάρμακα για στρατιωτικά πειράματα και κρυσταλλικά υγρά. Ο Σέρς Μονάστ, ερευνητής δημοσιογράφος και μέλος της του Διεθνούς Παγκοσμίου Ελεύθερου Τύπου, πέθανε στις 5 Δεκεμβρίου 1996 από υποτιθέμενη καρδιακή προσβολή στα χέρια της Ρωσίδας γυναίκας του. Ο Σέρς Μονάστ συγκυνηγήθηκε από την αστυνομία και το στρατό στη Βόρεια Αμερική επειδή διερεύνησε βαθιά στους άκρως απόρριτους φακέλους και είχε αποφασίσει να εμποδίσει και να εκδώσει το όλο θέμα για την άμυνα των ανθρώπων. Για τον Σέρς η ιστορία κατέληξε άσχημα και ήταν αληθινή. Έχασε τη ζωή του σε αυτή την περιπέτεια. Αυτό είναι το ανδιαφυσβητούμενο γεγονός. Στη μνήμη του Σέρς Μονάστ.
Ένα RFID chip. Ας προσέξουμε να μην τα παραλάβουμε. Αυτό μας ετοιμάζουν ο ΟΗΕ, διαμέσου του ΟΗΕ, που βγήκε διαταγή και είπαν ότι όλος ο πλανήτης πρέπει να εφοδιαστεί με ένα RFID chip μέχρι το 2010. 186 χώρες το πήραν. Υπολείπονται άλλες 8.
I got a call one day from
Rockefeller banking and business dynasty. After maintaining a close friendship with Nicholas Rockefeller, Aaron eventually ended the relationship, appalled by what he had learned about the Rockefellers and their ambitions.
I got a call one day from an attorney woman I knew, and she said, "Would you like to meet one of the Rockefellers?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." And we became friends, and he began to divulge a lot of things to me. So he said to me one night, he said that there's going to be an event there, and out of that event, you're going to see, we're going to go into Afghanistan, so we can run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We're going to go into Iraq to take the oil and establish a base in the Middle East, and we're going to go into Venezuela and try and get rid of Chavez. And the first two they've accomplished. Chavez they didn't accomplish. And he said you're going to see guys going into caves looking for looking for people that they're never going to find. You know, he was laughing about the fact that you have this war on terror. There's no real enemy. He's talking about how by having this war on terror, you can never win it because it's an eternal war. And so you can always keep taking people's liberties away.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee to tell what I knew of activities which might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret.
It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
I'm Jim Tucker. I've chased Bilderberg for 30 years. I'll never give up the chase. Bilderberg plan for the whole world is nothing less than world government.
I'm not comfortable with that at all. Who elected these guys to run the planet?
They are the elitists. They feel they should run the world for their own selfish interests.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Bilderberg is making great progress toward a world government, and only an educated, informed public can stop them in their tracks.
David Rockefeller admits in his own memoirs that he wants to destroy the United States. Right. He's a traitor!
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
I need you to move off the property, please.
Some shots were fired.
There's Bilderbergers right there.
The Trans-Texas Corridor is a vital part because we stop here in Texas. We stop the New World Order right here in Texas.
This thing started here. And to save this country, we kill this damn thing here.
A chance for the President of the United States to carry out a phrase his father used, and that is a New World Order.
Your New World Order will fall. Humanity will defeat you. The answer to 1984 is 1776.
In the near future, Earth is dominated by a powerful world government. Once free nations are slaves to the will of a tiny elite. The dawn of a new dark age is upon mankind. Countries are a thing of the past. Every form of independence is under attack, with the family and even the individual itself nearing extinction. Close to 80% of the Earth's population has been eliminated. The remnants of a once free humanity are forced to live within highly controlled, compact, prison-like cities. Travel is highly restricted. Superhighways connect the megacities and keep the population from entering into unauthorized zones. No human activity is private. AI supercomputers chronicle and categorize every action. A prison planet dominated by a ruthless gang of control freaks whose power can never be challenged. This is the vision of the global elite, their goal. A program of total dehumanization where the science of tyranny is law. A worldwide control grid designed to ensure the overlord's monopoly of power forever. Our species will be condemned to this nightmare future unless the masses are awakened to the New World Order master plan and mobilized to defeat it. Erected by a secretive group, the Georgia Guidestones are a testament to the elite's plan for a world religion, global laws, with a global court and army to enforce it. And set in stone, it is written that the population never rise above 500 million. In this film, you will learn how our world is truly governed. You will see how highly secretive roundtable groups interlock to form a global intelligence network. This group has been steering planetary affairs for hundreds of years. Now, in the final stage, they prepare for open world government. A goal tyrants throughout history have lusted after. Dr. Michael Kaufman is a published ecologist specializing in ecosystem research, forest ecology, and ecosystem classification. Dr. Kaufman played a key role in blocking the ratification of the Convention on Biological Diversity in the U.S. Senate.
The concept of a New World Order has been around for centuries. It's been receiving tremendous play over the last half of the 20th century. George Bush, the first senior president, George Bush, used it a lot in his speeches and really implies that he really wants to see a order in which we have a universal or a global type of governance in which every human being on planet Earth is ultimately responsible to policies that are being formulated at the international level.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
President Bush said that the New World Order was in tune, and that's what they were working for. The UN is part of that government. They're working right now very significantly for a North American Union. That's why there's a lot of people in Washington that don't care too much about our borders. They have a philosophic belief that national sovereignty is not important. It's also the reason I have made very strong suggestion that we need not be in the United Nations for our national security.
It's really always the same. You go back throughout all of history, the Roman Empire, Soviet Union, Hitler during the Nazism was always saying that it's going to create the utopia for the average person, when in fact, history always shows that it does exactly the opposite.
Conquest and empire is as old as civilization. Babylon, Egypt, and Greece. They all built empires in an attempt to rule the world. The Roman system at its peak dominated the known world. Complex governmental systems were developed to control diverse populations. During the period between the 15th and 19th century, new empires emerged and again waged war for supremacy. The nobility, as well as the thriving merchant class, were financed by a handful of private banks. Many of the great money houses would hedge their bets and finance both sides of a war. By Vice Chairman of Rothschild Europe, Franco Barnaby, who is speaking with Henry Kravitz, and behind them is Richard Holbrooke, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. The head of Daimler Chrysler, Jürgen Erich Schrimp, arrives by helicopter. Here, the owner of the Washington Post, Donald Graham, escorts Indra Nooyi, the head of PepsiCo. Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, whose father, Prince Bernhard, founded Bilderberg, is a leading figure in the group. Of course, globalist kingpin David Rockefeller, seen here with his bodyguard, James Ford, always attends. The then newly appointed World Bank chief Paul Wolfowitz is photographed at Bilderberg 2005. It has been reported that Wolfowitz had attended previous meetings, while still the Deputy Secretary of Defense.
I'm very proud of
Judicial and executive branches of government. Now, all power resides with the President. For the smallest of reasons, including, in the document's own text, any incident in the world, regardless of location, that affects population, infrastructure, environment, economy, or government functions can trigger, at the President's will, total martial law. It is important to add that the President is merely a puppet of the global crime syndicate and may not use the new powers, but simply pass them on for use by future puppet administrations. For over 50 years, the Bilderberg Group constructed the European Union by stealth under the guise of trade deals. Now the elite are using the same secretive program to complete the North American Union. But this time, superstate integration is on the extreme fast track. International agreements like NAFTA, GATT, and APEC were just stepping stones in the formation of the NAU. The North American Union was officially born at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, on March 23, 2005. The leaders of the United States, Mexico, and Canada told the press that they were only meeting to discuss trade. It soon leaked that a secret meeting had been held during the Security and Prosperity Trilateral Summit. The three governments had refused to release the secret agreement to the people. In September of 2006, their treasonous operation was blown wide open. From September 12th to September 14th, in Banff, Canada, hundreds of elected and appointed government leaders from Canada, Mexico, and the United States met in secret. On the last day of the conference, someone inside the secret North American Union Forum leaked the agenda. The front pages of newspapers across Canada carried the story. The Judicial Watch Foundation submitted Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain the full agenda and minutes of the secret assembly. Many federal agencies refused, citing national security. The foundation finally succeeded and did receive thousands of pages of documents. The documents marked unclassified are the blueprints of a shadow government ruling by bureaucratic and executive fiat. The pages chronicle an already operating North American Union. Transportation, law enforcement, agriculture, regulation, banking, manufacturing, construction, education, immigration, and even the military are being merged with no input from the people or their elected representatives in Congress and Parliament. One of the first items on their agenda was to stress how important it was that their plan, quote, be carried out by stealth. The controllers also talked about exploiting the public's fears of climate change to push a continent-wide tax to fund the new government. Globalist tool Robert Pastor is incessantly paraded on the world stage as the man behind the North American merger. When he testified before Congress, he pushed the idea of a continental security perimeter that erases national boundaries and merges the security apparatus.
The best way to secure the United States today is not at our two borders with Mexico and Canada, but at the borders of North America as a whole.
In fact, the North American Command, based in Colorado Springs, Colorado, was clearly running the meeting in Canada. For the past decade, the Pentagon has been training with Mexican and Canadian forces and has openly discussed using them inside the United States for disasters and to quell domestic unrest. There are already over 100,000 non-U.S. citizens serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. The Pentagon is now expanding its recruiting centers in Mexico, the Philippines, and Eastern Europe. Big city police departments nationwide are lobbying to change laws so they can recruit non-citizens to join the police force. What we are witnessing is a Red Dawn scenario in slow motion. Tyrants throughout history have brought in foreigners to oppress their domestic populations. When their coup by stealth was exposed, the three governments went into damage control mode. The Security and Prosperity Partnership quickly staged a show summit that was held in Ottawa, Canada in February of 2007.
It is the only way that we can achieve security and prosperity for our people is through this cooperation. We actually occupy one physical space, the North America. We've also had a chance as foreign ministers to talk about how we cooperate in the region and indeed in the world.
Protesters who were upset about losing their countries and freedoms were not tolerated.
A couple of weeks ago, an Al-Qaeda supposed.
Whatsoever, the Security and Prosperity Partnership has been signed without any sort of parliamentary debate.
Globalist publications have been open with their frustration that the population has not bought their latest PR stunt. As integration inside the European and American unions accelerates, the superstates themselves are being merged. On April 30th, 2007, a summit was held at the White House. The Security and Prosperity Partnership's secretive approach had alarmed the public. So this time, President Bush, German Chancellor Merkel, and EU Commission President Barroso hid their treachery in plain sight.
I thank the Chancellor and Josie very much for the transatlantic economic integration plan.
And for that too, we need to develop a common market, common standards.
So this is indeed a very important agreement, and an agreement that also brings with it a Transatlantic Economic Council to be a permanent body with senior people on both sides of the Atlantic that will look at all those issues in a concrete manner, in which way we can make it move forward.
The BBC reported that the US and EU had agreed on a single market. By announcing a new economic community integration, they were simply repeating what had been done in America and the EU on a larger scale. The accord states that the two blocs will aggressively push regulatory convergence in more than 35 areas, from financial services, intellectual property, military, education, mergers and acquisitions. They also agreed to jointly push a global carbon tax.
We recognize that we have a problem with greenhouse gases.
We agree there is a global threat, it's a serious threat. We agree there is the need to establish a limit to greenhouse gases.
We need to discuss the possible pricing of CO2. How can we translate this into a market economic compatible scheme?
We have agreed to establish a high-level group, a forum.
This EU-US result is translated into the G8, debated together with the outreach countries, China, South Africa, Brazil, among others, and India.
A global solution to a global problem.
If Bilderberg succeeds, America falls. All the victimized countries lose their sovereignty.
Bilderberg is not a person, it's not an idea, it's an ideal, a very powerful group of people working together and from the positions of ultimate and absolute power, destroying every constitution on earth, no matter how powerful the constitution of the nation is. That's what these people do.
The African Union arose out of the African Economic Community, set up in the early 1980s. The African Union is financed by a consortium of international bodies, governments, and corporations. The African Union Army serves as an enforcement arm for the New World Order's exploitation of Africa. In Asia, APEC and ASEAN have announced plans to form the Asian Union, consisting of Asian and Pacific nations, having more than 3 billion people within its borders.
APEC will become the Asian Pacific Union, and the world is to be divided into 3 great regions for the administrative convenience of the world government in which the UN is to evolve.
As the unions form individually, they are simultaneously merged to form the first planetary government.
They're trying to destroy every nation on earth which is trying to promote progress, because these people basically they are landowners. They don't need progress because they control the land. If you take the most powerful man in London, the people who belong to the Council and the Committee of 300, who belong to the Bilderbergers, you know, the British royalty, the Guelphs, the black nobility of Venice and Genoa, these people they're landowners. The New World Order is the Old World Order. I mean, it's just the names have changed, the appearances have changed, but the concept hasn't changed. The idea is still to bring the men back, kicking and screaming back to the Middle Ages, post-industrial age world order.
One of the things that is very shocking to most Americans is the fact that the United Nations Global Biodiversity Assessment, which came out in 1995, clearly shows that in order to protect planet Earth, we have to go back to a feudal system. They actually said that in the document.
To craft a modern feudal society, the globalists are implementing a standardized North American Union ID card to track, trace, and control their serfs as they travel throughout the 3 regions of the NAU. Building on the massive displacement of humanity caused by globalization, the New World Order is rapidly constructing the physical infrastructure of the North American Union, the NAFTA Superhighway Control Grid.
I'm Arthur Peterson, Colonel retired in the Army. I see things today that are happening that would make my friend who died in World War II turned over in their grave. To think that people would even consider confiscating land of farmers and ranchers and taking their homes away from them to turn it over to a foreign company in Spain, which was controlled by Don Carlos, I understand, a notorious socialist, and they get the tolls on Texas land for 50 years.
The proposed Trans-Texas corridor would be a patchwork of superhighways and railroads stretching 4,000 miles from the border of Mexico, cutting through Texas to Oklahoma. A lease has been signed that would make Texas Highway 121 a toll road. A private Spanish company won the bid to build and collect the tolls for the next 50 years. These deals with private companies are being negotiated largely in secret, and many state lawmakers are worried taxpayers are being sold down the road.
Critics say it's a threat to our national security. It's part of a plan for a North American integration being carried out by government and corporate elites without congressional or voter approval.
We took to the air over central Texas to get a bird's eye view of the Trans-Texas Corridor, which is under construction and will form the heart of the Trans-NAFTA Superhighway system. History revenues raised will also be used to fund the fledgling North American Union and its growing bureaucracy. Bottom line, they're using our own money to enslave us.
First of all, they're proposing a North American tribunal, which would be similar to what we have in Chapter 11 of the NAFTA agreement, which is trumped by international law. The U.S. Supreme Court and our Constitution could potentially be rendered invalid, and what we would have is new North American business law that would trump what we have here in the United States.
What is also interesting to note that the NAFTA headquarters is in Mexico and controls the United States trade and rules against the United States Congress, and no one seems to challenge it.
It's very probable and probably inevitable that our right to bear arms would be challenged in a North American court. So this is just an example of what's happening and what's being proposed.
We want to keep our trial by jury system. We want to keep our right to keep and bear arms. We want a system where we have a Supreme Court and not have a tribunal that will be superior to the Supreme Court.
In 2005, Centra, a Spanish-owned company, signed a secret agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation to erect toll roads on existing roads and to toll new roads that were completely paid for by tax dollars. Continuously heaped praise on the corrupt communist Chinese model. In August of 1973, in an article written by David Rockefeller for the New York Times, Rockefeller openly lauds and endorses Mao Zedong's actions while celebrating their command and control system.
Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in history. David Rockefeller, New York Times, August 10, 1973.
Communist China is the model planned society for the New World Order. China has received more United Nations awards for its policies and form of governance than any other nation. In the eyes of globalist planners, authoritarian China is the future. China adopted the dreaded one-child policy due to lobbying from a consortium of eugenics organizations, which includes Planned Parenthood and the United Nations. Couples that have more than one child face heavy fines and imprisonment. The practice of forced abortion in China, coupled with the cultural desire to have a male child, has plunged China into a deepening crisis where there are 30 million more men than women. The Chinese police state ruthlessly crushes all forms of dissent. Underground churches, Falun Gong practitioners, striking factory workers are all sent to forced labor camps. Their blood and tissue types are cataloged in preparation for organ harvesting. The Chinese government then sells the prisoners' organs to the highest bidder on the world market. If a wealthy patient chooses to fly into China, the prisoner is killed and the organs are implanted. If the organs are being flown out of the country, a mobile execution van extracts the organs on the way to the waiting aircraft. The social engineers of China aggressively euthanize the elderly and disabled. China is merely following the globalist blueprint for the world. The same system of total dehumanization is quietly being phased in worldwide.
Depopulation should be the highest priority of foreign policy towards the Third World. Henry Kissinger, 1974.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world. Now, none of this may succeed this time, but this to me is sort of the outline by which someday, in the next few years, a solution will emerge.
Where does this mindset come from? Why do the elites kill the largest masses of people when no one is resisting them, when they've already attained total control? What ideology drives the elite psychopath? Since Plato's time 2,400 years ago, state planners have openly proclaimed their desire to control every detail of the commoner's life. From breeding programs to mass extermination of undesirables, the dark dream has continued on for millennia. The scientific rationale for tyranny has always been attractive to elites because it creates a convenient excuse for treating their fellow man as lower than animals. Robert Thomas Malthus, famous for saying that a mass food collapse would be helpful because it would wipe out the poor. His fictional scenario would later be called a Malthusian catastrophe. Malthus is important because his ideas led to the rise of a new scientific field that would dominate the course of human history for the next 200+ years. Charles Darwin, an admirer of the Malthusian catastrophe model, developed the theory of evolution, its chief tenet being the survival of the fittest. With the help of T.H. Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog for his strong support of Darwin's theories were pushed into wide acceptance among key scientific circles throughout England and then the world. Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, credited as the father of eugenics, saw an opportunity to advance mankind by taking the reins of Darwin's evolution theory and applied social principles to develop social Darwinism. The families, Darwin, Galton, Huxley, and Wedgwood, were so obsessed with their new social design theory that they pledged their families would only breed with each other. They falsely predicted that within only a few generations, they would produce supermen. The emerging pseudoscience was only codifying the practice of inbreeding, already popular within elites for millennia. The four families experiment was a disaster. Within only 2 generations of inbreeding, close to 90% of their offspring either died at birth or were seriously mentally or physically handicapped. The moneyed class of the planet, and particularly the royal families of the world, who were already obsessed with breeding and filled with a predatory disdain for the underclass, seized on the new science and began aggressively enforcing its aims worldwide. Biometrics appears to be a new science, but it was actually developed by Galton back in the 1870s as a way to track racial traits and genetic histories, and as a way to decide who would be licensed to breed. In 1904, the Cold Springs Harbor Research Facility was started in the United States by eugenicist Charles Davenport with the funding of prominent robber barons Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Harriman. In 1907, the first sterilization laws were passed in the United States. Citizens with mild deformities or low test scores on their report cards were arrested and forcibly sterilized.
You're 17, aren't you, Alice? Yes, but what have you done with my folks? Well, we're trying to help them, Alice, and you too. They were taken to the hospital this afternoon. Hospital? Wasn't none of them sick this morning? We thought it necessary to present your family's case to the State Medical Commission. After an examination, they decided there was but one important action to take: to have your entire family sterilized. Why, what's that? I don't know what you're talking about. Now, in this state, we have a law which provides for such people to have an operation so there won't be any more children. I see. Now, we've placed your brothers in institutions where they'll be properly cared for. You can go back to your job soon. I'll arrange to have it held open for you. But I'm keeping my job. I'm not going anywhere. Now, you're going to the hospital too, Alice. And you mean they're going to stop me from having children ever? Exactly. I'm all right, I tell you. I won't go to any hospital. We don't want any trouble with you, young woman. If you refuse to go, the officer here will take you by force.
In 1910, the U.S. Eugenics Record Office was set up. By then, the British had created the first network of social workers, expressly to serve as spies and enforcers of the eugenics race cult that was rapidly taking control of Western society. The social workers would decide who would have their children taken away, who would be sterilized, and in some cases, who would be quietly murdered. In 1911, the Rockefeller family exports eugenics to Germany by bankrolling the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which later would form a central pillar in the Third Reich. At the 1912 International Eugenics Conference in London, eugenics becomes an international craze and gains superstar status. The futurist and best-selling sci-fi author H.G. Wells had studied biology under top eugenicists and was spreading the new faith worldwide. In 1916, H.G. Wells' lover, Margaret Sanger, starts her promotion of eugenics in the United States. In 1923, Sanger receives massive funding from the Rockefeller family. Sanger wrote to fellow eugenicist Clarence J. Gamble that black leaders would need to be recruited to act as frontmen in sterilization programs directed against black communities. In 1924, Hitler pens Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, and credits U.S. eugenicist as his inspiration. Hitler even wrote a fan letter to American eugenicist and conservationist Madison Grant, calling his race-based book, The Passing of the Great Race, his Bible. Hitler developed the plan for mass extermination of the Jews and what he called other sub-races, as well as the handicapped from Grant. By 1927, eugenics hit the mainstream. The so-called science was aggressively pushed through contests at schools, churches, and at state fairs. Churches competed in contests with big cash prizes to see who could best implement eugenics into their sermons. Major denominations then tell Americans that Jesus is for eugenics. That same year in the United States, more than 25 states passed forced sterilization laws, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of brutal sterilization policies. When Hitler came to power in 1933, one of his first acts was to pass national eugenics laws, modeled after laws in the United States. By 1936, Germany had become the world leader in eugenics for taking effective actions to sterilize and euthanize hundreds of thousands of victims. The big three of American eugenics, Davenport, Laughlin, and Goethe, were dispatched by the Rockefellers to Germany, where they advised the Nazis on the fine-tuning of their extermination system. With the strong support of the U.S. and England, Germany had gone over the edge, and tens of millions would pay with their lives. At the end of the war, the Allies protected from prosecution the very Nazi scientist that had tortured thousands of people to death. The Nazi brand of eugenics had embarrassed the elites, but they had no intention of stopping their plans. The Allies literally fought with each other over who would get top Nazi eugenicist. It didn't matter if the SS doctors had tortured tens of thousands to death. They were free to go. The Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele, and his boss, Ottmar von Verscher, were not prosecuted, and von Verscher even continued his work in Germany after the war. Eugenicists were angry that their great work had been exposed. They then scrambled to camouflage their agenda. Eugenics Quarterly became Social Biology. The American Birth Control League became Planned Parenthood. New terms like transhumanism, population control, sustainability, conservation, and environmentalism replaced racial hygiene and social Darwinism. Many eugenicists of the previous period engaged in what they called crypto-eugenics, purposefully taking their eugenics beliefs underground. They became highly respected anthropologists, biologists, and geneticists in the post-war world. The Allies then smuggled thousands of Nazi scientists out of Germany and placed them in key scientific positions, ranging from bioweapons to rocketry throughout the military-industrial complex. The founder of IBM was a devout follower of Hitler. Thomas J. Watson had supplied his punch card computers and IBM technicians to the Nazis for use in the death camps. Tattoos on camp victims were IBM human identification numbers, which fed into the computers. IBM had used similar punch card systems as early as 1928 in a Jamaican race mixing study. The first real computers were literally invented by a eugenicist for eugenics. UN chieftain and unrepentant eugenicist Julian Huxley argued that since the leaders of eugenics had founded the environmental and conservation movements, that they should be used as vehicles in the formation of a world government. Just as H.G. Wells had envisioned, this government would be controlled by a scientific dictatorship and would be guided by the principles of eugenics. Huxley created the World Wildlife Fund with Bilderberg founder and former SS officer Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Prince Philip of England.
In the event that I am reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. Prince Philip, Reported by Deutsche Presseagentur, DPA, August 1988.
Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World and brother of Julian Huxley, gave a speech at Berkeley in 1962, shortly before his death. He admitted that his best-selling book, Brave New World, written in 1932, was based not on fiction, but on what the elite were actually planning to implement.
And here I would like briefly to compare the parable of Brave New World with another parable which was put forth more recently in George Orwell's book, 1984. I'm inclined to think that the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. That if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being, well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy who...
The elite have left a massive wave of destruction behind them as they cold-bloodedly experiment on civilian populations as if we are lab rats. A string of congressional investigations has uncovered more than 20,000 secret tests that were carried out against the American people between 1910 and 2000. One well-known eugenics study, the Tuskegee Syphilis Project, killed hundreds of blacks and spanned 40 years until whistleblowers exposed it in 1972. From 1943 until present, the British have tested lethal nerve gas on their own personnel, on land, air, and sea. Many died instantly. Still others died grueling deaths over several years. The federal government commissioned secret radiation experiments on thousands of non-consenting patients. Hundreds of hospitals in the U.S. injected healthy men, women, and children with uranium and plutonium at dosage levels ranging from
have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. People can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy. And these methods, I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance. But then there are various other methods which one can think of. There is, for example, the pharmacological method. This was one of the things I talked about in Brave New World. And the result would be that, I mean, you can imagine a euphoric which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible.
Therapeutic to lethal, killing many of the test subjects. Pregnant wives of GIs were given vitamins by base doctors that actually consisted of highly radioactive uranium-239 and plutonium-241, resulting in violent miscarriages and the death of the mothers. Soldiers, sailors, and Marines were used as guinea pigs in hundreds of atomic and hydrogen bomb tests. Patriotic Americans were radiated side by side with lab animals. Pilots were forced to repeatedly fly through mushroom clouds of DNA-destroying radiation. From 1951 to 1961, the U.S. Army paid Israel's health ministry 3 million lira to conduct radiation testing on Sephardic children that immigrated to Israel. The government-run public schools would tell the children that they were going to get a medical checkup and that they were receiving an X-ray. The Pentagon had already radiated more than 4,000 institutionalized children in the United States, many of which had died. More than 110,000 of the darker-skinned Jews were given 35,000 times the maximum dose of X-rays to the head repeatedly. Many of the children died within months. All of them lost their hair. Some still live today and endure excruciating health problems. The covert testing of chemical, biological, and radiological agents on unsuspecting populations continues worldwide today. From 1940 to 1979, the vast majority of the British population was sprayed by aircraft more than 2,000 times with deadly chemicals and microorganisms without ever being told. In 1968, the Pentagon tested a deadly bioweapon on New York subways and placed personnel in local hospitals to monitor the effects. Aggressive sterilization of men and women continued in many states until the mid-1980s. The United States and England are currently testing pesticides and highly toxic experimental drugs on tens of thousands of healthy foster children, many of which die as a result of the experiments. Prisons across the nation have forced inmates to participate in grisly experiments, ranging from pesticide studies to having tablets of dioxin sewn into their backs.
Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebs would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. Bertrand Russell.
H.G. Wells, Aldous Huxley, Bertrand Russell, and hundreds of other eugenicists constantly bragged about how the establishment believed themselves to be a separate, more advanced species than the common man. Top eugenicists were bold enough to admit that their real goal was not improving the heredity of the commoner, but to further dumb them down so that they could be more manageable. Nobel Prize winner Russell wrote at length about how vaccinations filled with mercury and other brain-damaging compounds would induce partial chemical lobotomies and develop a servile zombie population.
Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Bertrand Russell.
Over 100 years ago, eugenicist social planners said that they'd use mind-altering drugs to control the population. By 2007, more than 20% of the U.S. population were on some type of prescription antidepressant. But in the case of foster children, a sector where the state has total control, at least 2/3 are forced to take a cocktail made up of, on average, 7 psychotropic drugs. Chairman of the Texas Society of Psychiatric Physicians, Joe Burkett, testified before the State House Select Committee hearing on psychotropic drugs in foster care and shocked the public when he said that 2/3 of foster children in Texas had been placed on psychiatric drugs because they were very, very sick from a bad gene pool.
A lot of these kids come from bad gene pools. They don't have stable parents making good decisions. Besides the gene pools, they've then been traumatized by abuse, neglect, and problems, and then they've been traumatized by separation, and all those things predispose to mental illness.
The Western world is now implementing eugenics pre-crime policies. Fetuses are now being pre-screened according to family histories of crime. From Portland, Oregon to London, England, Child Protective Services are enrolling newborn children into criminal databases at birth and forcing them to attend probation hearings at age 2. The overlords of scientific dictatorship are ruthlessly prosecuting a war on our most defenseless. In December of 1974, the U.S. government made third world population reduction a central national security issue. The operation plan, titled National Security Study Memorandum 200, was simply a regurgitation of the British Commission on Population created by King George VI of England in 1944, which openly stated that populous third world nations posed a threat to the international elite's monopoly of global power. The Kissinger-authored U.S. plan targeted 13 key countries where massive population reduction was called for. Kissinger recommended that IMF and World Bank loans be citizens would more willingly give up their national sovereignty if it were sold as a way to help the planet. The think tank also concocted the peak oil fraud as a way to create artificial scarcity. And the Club of Rome has been aggressively pushing a global carbon tax as a way to fund their planetary government.
In the draft copy of the United Nations Global Biodiversity Assessment, it states very clearly that we must reduce the human population from its current level of about 6 billion people down to about 1 billion people.
In the 1970s, South Africa developed race-specific bioweapons to target blacks and Asians, and then subsequently sold the technology to Israel in the mid-1980s. In September of 2000, the Project for a New American Century published a document in which Dick Cheney described race-specific bioweapons as politically useful tools.
And somebody mentioned, well, why would they want to reduce the human population when that means less money for them? Most people have no idea. They're not after money. They have all the money they need. They're after power. That's their aphrodisiac.
The overlords of the New World Order are now aggressively pushing for a worldwide one-child policy. The Chinese one-child policy was phased in gradually. In the 60s, when it began, you only had to pay a tax penalty. Only later did they imprison you if you had more than one child. Now the exact same proposals to penalize couples who have more than one child are being made in the United States, England, and Europe.
In the push to reduce global warming, children, according to some, are the new culprits. A think tank in the UK says too many kids are what's making the planet worse, saying large families